This week,
because of the evaporation. You can say it's natural air conditioning.
from LA to Berlin to Singapore, cities are on the front lines of the climate crisis. What can they do to adapt to an uncertain future?
Air pollution is really, according to the WHO, the world's greatest environmental health threat. And we are simply not doing enough against it.
Air pollution is a silent killer in urban environments around the world. We'll be talking to one company collecting data to combat the problem.
If we continue along today's path, then that sets us up for a future where air conditioning may actually become one of our single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions.
And harnessing the power of the night sky to keep buildings cool without heating the planet. Why it's high time for an AC redesign. I'm Kaylee Limes, and this is Bloomberg Green. More than half of humanity is crowded together in cities. That's about 4 billion people living on top of one another, working, commuting, and polluting. They're responsible for about 75% of greenhouse gas emissions. And that proportion will only rise. By 2050, the United Nations says almost 70% of the world's population will live in urban areas. More cities than ever are implementing measures to fight climate change and mitigate the impact of extreme weather events on their communities. And their actions will have the power to turn the tide on the climate crisis. Because no matter how much the world warms, cities will have it worse. High temperatures, rising sea levels, and extreme weather are all felt more acutely in concrete jungles. In Germany, an innovative climate adaptation strategy is emerging to tackle these issues by imitating the very thing cities have destroyed: nature.
Cities are concrete, glass and steel. They look and act unnaturally, absorbing heat and repelling water. Our urban spaces are at odds with the natural environment. But in parts of the German capital, things are different. To deal with rainwater and heat, Berlin's being transformed into what's being called a sponge city.
Der wesentliche Ansatz der Sponge City ist, dass wir das Regenwasser in der Stadt behalten. Wenn Wasser verdunstet, wird auch die Stadt entsprechend gekühlt.
Carlo Becker's the architect of Berlin's Sponge City strategy, which harnesses rainwater and manages heat.
Das Wasser ist für uns eine Rohstoffquelle. Das soll nicht mehr abgeführt werden, sondern muss in der Stadt bleiben.
In a natural ecosystem, rainwater is soaked up by soil and vegetation. The majority then evaporates, and the rest filters deeper into the ground. The evaporating water then cools the surroundings. Cities disrupt this system. Water can't soak through the concrete and is piped away. The Sponge City strategy aims to keep rainwater where it lands, to imitate the natural water cycle. Buildings are covered in green roofs and facades, and down on street level, urban wetlands and roadside trenches known as swales filter runoff and hold water, keeping the city cool by imitating nature. This is Ruhmesburg in East Berlin. Built 20 years ago, it's become a large-scale example of the sponge city concept.
On top we have an extensive green roof of approximately 6 to 8 centimeters. And from there the water flows into this courtyards here in the middle, and underneath there is a garage. On top of the underground garage we have a soil layer of almost 80 centimeters. It's like a sponge, and it soaks the water during heavy rainfall, and then it's used by the plants. So they take all the water and finally evaporate it.
Heiko Sieker is the brains behind the neighbourhood's innovative management of stormwater.
In the whole area here we have no storm sewer system. So no conventional pipe system. The water flows from the road surface into the swale, and from here it's infiltrating into the ground. On hot summer days you can really feel the coolness here. It's much cooler compared to other parts of the city because of the evaporation. You can say it's natural air conditioning.
Romsburg's just one example of a sponge city. Neighbourhoods across Berlin have implemented similar initiatives. But Berlin isn't a perfect sponge city.
Ausnahmezustand in Berlin.
Die deutsche Hauptstadt unter Wasser gesetzt.
In the middle of summer 2017, the heaviest rain in a century hit the city, submerging parts underwater and warning how much work is still to do.
Die Maßnahmen, die wir durchzuführen haben, der Klimaanpassung, sind im Wesentlichen bekannt. Diese müssen nur umgesetzt werden. Dafür braucht man den politischen Willen.
In fact, the city councils recently decided all new developments should manage stormwater on site in the spirit of the sponge city. Climate change is forcing Berlin and many other cities around the world to adapt urban environments, transforming them to work with nature, not against it.
For more from our Quick Take team, go to Bloomberg.com or @QuickTake on Twitter. Coming up, air pollution kills millions a year, but one startup is providing means to measure harmful emissions. We'll be speaking to their CEO about how to clean up our cities. This is Bloomberg Green.
This is Bloomberg Green. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in New York with your Green Brief. The EU is planning a first-of-its-kind border levy to combat climate change. It plans to slap duties on imports of steel, cement, and aluminum from countries with lower environmental standards. The levy will be based on the carbon costs that domestic producers already face. The G7 is moving to target environmental crimes. The move is about cracking down on existing offenses rather than making new laws. It wants companies to better disclose their impact on the climate, but it falls short of the UK's ambition for mandatory reporting on climate risks. Final details will be ironed out at the upcoming COP26 meeting. The western U.S. is facing its worst drought in decades. It's off the charts of anything recorded in the 20-year history of the U.S. Drought Monitor. Farmers, cities, and power suppliers are scrambling for access to water. It's also raising the risk of wildfires. And making tires for an electric vehicle is a ruthless exercise in compromise. Too much stick, and the car won't travel as far on a charge. Too little, and it will silently slide off the road. But tire maker Michelin says it has found the perfect balance after 30 years tinkering with its recipe, adding 7% additional range to EVs fitting with the tire. Next, they want to make them fully recyclable. And that's your Green Brief.
Thanks, Jen. Well, air pollution in cities is a problem as old as cities themselves. The World Health Organization says that 9 out of 10 people breathe air that exceeds safe levels of pollutants. In fact, the WHO estimates that air pollution kills 7 million people worldwide every year. A first step in tackling this problem will be accurately measuring harmful emissions so that solutions can be effectively targeted. One startup offering the hardware to do so is Breeze Technologies, whose pollution-sniffing boxes were recently shortlisted for the 2021 Future Hamburg Award. Joining me now is the founder and CEO of the company, Robert Heinecke. Robert, first frame to me why air quality is so important.
If you look at today's metropolises, they just have very few data points where they're actually measuring how air quality is actually developing over time. And we are aiming to change that. So we want to give cities, municipalities, the government, more data into their hands to accurately understand where air pollution actually comes from, how it disperses over the city, and also what can be done.
But even if policymakers are armed with that data, how do you convince them to act?
Yeah, that's actually one of the biggest challenges. So many cities actually are not so interested in gathering more data because it simply might just uncover additional problems. But NASA, the European Space Agency, are both launching new satellite missions that are going to uncover these challenges anyway in the next decades. So the cities really have the choice whether they want to tackle this issue now and whether they want to be the ones who can actually frame the problem, the context, also the solutions that are going to be implemented, or whether they want to wait until some external party uncovers all the challenges that they might have, and thereby it gets out of their control. So today is really the point of time when cities can act on it themselves.
So let's talk about some of those solutions then.
Let's take Hamburg for an example, where I'm based. So here, the government very early on, after Dieselgate, started to close down roads for diesel vehicles. But the data has actually shown that this was not very efficient. Air quality more or less stayed the same. In another neighborhood, they actually implemented some pedestrian zoning. And there we really saw it both increased the attractiveness of shopping areas, but it also increased the usage of public transport, which in turn decreased air pollution. And then in other parts of the city, in the port, for instance, they are trying to maintain the cruise ships and the cargo vessels that are landing there with power from the land side instead of having them run their own generators. And this, of course, also in turn decreases the emissions that are being caused. So we really need to look at where pollution comes from locally in the neighborhood and what to do about that.
Is it possible to have a major metropolitan city with truly clean air?
Well, I would hope to believe so. I think it's going to be an ongoing journey. And of course, many of the technologies that we need to get there to really be able to breathe clean and fresh air, also according to WHO standards, are still under development. I think electric mobility will really be one of the key technologies to enable us to do that. But we also need to think about mass transit, more public transport, making public transport more attractive, and also looking at, for instance, last mile delivery and how to solve that issue without having polluting vehicles and transportation in our cities.
Aside from emissions and pollution, are there other areas in which air quality data can help mitigate issues?
Well, the climate change issue, of course. So a lot of the air pollutants that we are tracking, like, for instance, ozone or also particulate matter, are at the same time also climate pollutants, short-lived climate pollutants. So if we tackle the air quality issue in our cities, then at the same time, with the same budget that is being spent on that, we're actually also on our way to solving the climate issue.
All right, Robert Heinecke, founder and CEO of Breeze Technologies, thank you so much. Coming up, what's the technology with the fastest growing appetite for electricity? It's not cars, it's air conditioning. We look next at the companies trying to cool buildings without heating the planet. This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lines, and this is Bloomberg Green. Heat waves kill more than any other extreme weather event, more than tornadoes, hurricanes, and even floods. And the urban heat island effect means that city dwellers are most at risk. How do we combat that? Air conditioners. But in this instance, the solution is just creating another problem. If things stay as they are, air conditioning will use as much electricity by 2050 as the entirety of India and China today. So we took a look at how scientists from across the globe are harnessing natural phenomena to drastically redesign this century-old technology.
Today's air conditioning and refrigeration systems essentially follow the same principles that have been around for about 100 years. If we continue along today's path, then that sets us up for a future where air conditioning may actually become one of our single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions later this century.
Air conditioners have become an inescapable part of our cities. They operate thanks to refrigerants, chemicals which, when released into the atmosphere, are potent greenhouse gases. AC units also require huge amounts of energy. The US uses more electricity for cooling than Africa does for everything. As it becomes affordable for millions more people, the problems that come with AC will only get worse, which is why scientists around the world are searching for solutions. Here at the National University of Singapore, Professor Chua and his team are completely rethinking air conditioning.
We need a quantum leap in air conditioning to save energy, secondly, to save our environment. What we have in the lab is next generation of air conditioners, where it's extremely environmentally friendly, less energy intensive, it doesn't eject heat to the environment, and doesn't need the chemical refrigerant. It's a water-based air conditioning. It requires only 1 liter of water to operate for 20 hours. And you can use rainwater to power up the system. But there's a limitation. The air needs to be dry before you can carry out this process in an efficient way.
And that's why there are two separate stages in this AC. First, it dries the air using membranes that filter the moisture. Then the water inside the unit evaporates, taking heat with it. It's close to what most of us experience every day, sweating. The system uses 30% less energy than a traditional air conditioner, and it's also expected to be 30% cheaper. Crucially, it uses no refrigerants. And although it's not available yet, the government is backing this project, betting that soon it could be a breath of fresh air for Singapore and beyond. Across the other side of the world, one startup in California is looking towards outer space to revolutionize cooling. And they're about to test their breakthrough in the field.
Right now, if we measure the temperature of our surface, it's around 48 degrees Fahrenheit, and the air temperature is 60 Fahrenheit. We're not evaporating water, and we're not using any electricity. You can see we're in the middle of a field, and it is just a thin film coating that enables this cooling effect, and it does this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
SkyCool Systems is commercializing a technology that harnesses the cold of the sky and space to enable electricity-free cooling, as implausible as that may sound at first glance. The way it works is it takes advantage of a natural phenomenon that allows a surface that's looking up to the sky to essentially send out some of its heat.
Nearly everything on Earth gives off heat in the form of infrared radiation. SkyCool's panels act like high-tech mirrors, reflecting some of that heat out to the cold expanse of space, allowing its surface to dip below the temperature of the surrounding air. SkyCool's multi-layered film means that it's now possible to achieve even during the day. The panels could be added on to today's cooling systems, reducing their energy use by as much as 20%.
The energy we use for cooling is expected to grow sixfold by the year 2050. And it's primarily going to be driven in warmer countries where air conditioning use is not prevalent today. What excites us about our technology is that it represents a unique and completely different way of handling the cooling problem by taking use of a resource that's always been there, the fact that space is cold. It's almost like this has been literally over our heads for centuries, millennia, but it's something we've not been able to use as a technology.
With the demand for air conditioning skyrocketing, using water and the cold of outer space may turn out to be the best bet we have for our warming cities.
So between fixing the problems of heat, water, and pollution, cities have a lot to do to adapt. But as well as facing the greatest problems, our urban environments could also be our best hope for surviving climate change. Let's bring in our green reporter, Laura Millan, in Madrid to talk further about these solutions. Laura, as we've seen, cities consume 2/3 of the global energy supply. So aren't they the source of the problem rather than the solution?
Well, yes, they are, but mainly because we are the source of the problem. Emissions by humans are what's making the planet warmer. Through our research, we have found that cities warm more and faster than rural areas, and we feel sea level rise more than areas that are not urbanized. But cities can also be part of the solution, just because so many human beings live in them. So many changes through history have come from cities, and so much money is invested in cities and from cities. Cities can be part of the solution as well.
So if cities want to reduce carbon emissions, what are some of the most popular solutions?
What we're seeing is lots of measures being implemented across the world. At the moment, one of the most popular ones is called the 15-minute city, which is this concept that started in Paris but has spread almost all over the world, where local authorities are trying to make cities more friendly to people, reduce traffic, reduce pollution, increase the number of green areas, encourage people to walk more. All of these things reduce emissions and reduce the city's impact on the environment.
But Laura, the cities with the biggest carbon footprint aren't Paris or Barcelona. They're in emerging markets. How do we decarbonize those?
That's the second challenge, or that's a big challenge. So cities in emerging markets are huge. Their impact, therefore, is huge as well. And usually local authorities and even the states themselves don't have as many resources to tackle these issues as a big city in Europe or the US might have. And yet we are seeing, and through a Bloomberg Green investigation, we saw how many of cities in Latin America, in Africa, and in Asia are implementing very innovative measures to address climate change. So in a big city, it's not enough to implement 15-minute city measures like making streets friendly for pedestrians. But we have seen cities like Bogota, the capital of Colombia, trying to implement a massive overhaul of their public transport system. It's right now one of the world's biggest rapid bus transit systems in the world. This means that instead of building very expensive metro lines, for example, they use buses that go through special lanes. The city is now, this system is working now, and the city is now trying to make it electric to reduce the impact of these buses on air pollution and on emissions, for example.
If you're tight on resources, it's best to be efficient. So what does the research tell us about the most efficient ways that cities can go green?
That's right. So a recent report told us something quite interesting, actually. Many cities are not spending the money where that money is better spent. Sometimes it's because cities can only focus in one thing when they should be focusing maybe on 4 or 5. Other times it's because these measures are not the most attractive or the most popular ones with citizens. But for example, we know that research tells us that the most efficient way of spending money to address climate issues in cities is to address building efficiency, make buildings more efficient so they leak less heat, they need less energy to be heated or cooled. Also, public transport measures, waste, and green areas are some of the fields where the money can be well spent.
Thanks very much to our Bloomberg Green reporter in Madrid, Laura Millan. That's it for this week's edition on the future of cities, but keep the conversation going. Follow us on Twitter @Climate. I'm Kayleigh Lyons. This is Bloomberg Green.